Welcome to Establish the Edge. I'm your host, Mike Leone, here with Adam Rauch to go over our weekly GPP game scores podcast. Before we dive into week 8, Adam, let's look at week 7. And that's a fairly good graph for us, for those watching on the YouTube channel, where we always compare the top 8 scorers in average DK points, the top 8 projected going into the game, what they actually finished at in average DK points relative to what their average ownership was. And we get one game in the top left, which means it didn't score a lot, but it was highly owned. And that's usually good for tournament players. That's the Arizona-Seattle game where Kenneth Walker was meh, Tyler Lockett kind of failed, Geno was meh, and Jackson Smith-Njigba was good, not amazing, but pretty good. And then the Arizona bringbacks all failed in that game. And I know I had a situation in a real small field tournament where I ended up on the KC Chargers game as a stack and was torn between a late swap of like a Seattle onslaught and sticking with the KC Chargers stack, and ended up sticking with KC Chargers because so many people were swapping into JSN and then also Geno. And, it just sort of worked out. It was also a weird thing, Adam, where the pass catchers for Seattle became better when DK Metcalf was ruled out, but Geno Smith himself was like kind of a worse play because you lose DK Metcalf. So that was interesting. The clear winners of the slate were the quarterback tight end stacks between Mahomes and Kelsey, or Lamar and Andrews.
Yeah, it was kind of funny because I ended up dirt planning JSN last week whenever we recorded, and then it turned out he ended up kind of being like the popular late swap play. So it wasn't even a gross play at that point.
I flag planted him on
really?
So from dirt plant to flag plant.
Wow, have we ever had that before? I don't know. I mean, what a transition for JSN. Yeah, so I mean, that stuff is kind of hard. We could not have foreseen that, of course, when we recorded last week, but that's just kind of how it all played out. And apologies for anyone who ended up playing the Seattle Arizona stack. But again, when you have a game that finishes in the top left, like in the top left corner, usually you're going to have a couple of games that kind of mirror that on the bottom right, which is what we want. And that's kind of what we got with the Mahomes doubles with Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce. And Josh Palmer, or, if you played the Lamar stack with Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers, brought it back with a really strong play in Jahmyr Gibbs. Or I even saw a couple lineups do the five-player stack from the same game, and they had Amon-Ra and Gibbs with Lamar, Zay, and Mark Andrews. I mean, last week was kind of the week. We kind of mentioned it. If you were going to play Lamar and Mark Andrews, like it actually price-wise and value-wise was kind of the week last week to do it. And we may have missed, if you didn't play them last week, you may have missed the boat because they shot up in price this week. It's going to be a little more difficult.
Yeah, and I kind of felt last week like my advice wasn't very good throughout the week, and then I ended up getting on the KC stuff Sunday morning, and part of that was, the Sims just really liked it, to be honest, just messing around with them and seeing how much they liked it. But I think too, we just kept seeing ownership condense more onto like Cooper Kupp with cheap quarterback and play the Seattle guys. And the expensive stack, even if you played like JSN with it, even if you played Walker with it, kind of got you away from like the Seattle onslaughts. It got you away from the cheap quarterback. And some of this stuff that affects the GPP game scores table, like the total salary of this stack, it didn't matter as much last week because it wasn't a super tightly priced week. And it still mattered a little bit. It was hard to build like Mahomes, Kelsey with Eckler or Keenan Allen. And it was kind of fortunate that Josh Palmer turned out to be the guy there. Otherwise that stack, it would, the bring back side at least wouldn't have worked out.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I was just going to use that as a transition into this week where, last week we had a really small slate with kind of an ugly totals and not a lot of great plays on especially on DraftKings. There weren't a lot of great plays at the beginning of the week. This week now we're kind of in an expanded slate. We've got every team playing 13 games on the main slate. But again, we're kind of running into a situation where we have a bunch of low totals. And I don't know what your initial thoughts are, but given the fact that we have a large amount of games on the main slate, I'm kind of okay with even these lower totals because I feel like there's just kind of some stronger plays across the board. As compared to last week.
Yeah, we also, we don't have a ton of choice either. I guess we have a ton of choice in terms of the amount of games, but not in terms of being picky and choosy about totals. I know we did talk last week too about, like, is it more important or less important to correlate when we kind of get these grosser games? Definitely saw in like both those game stacks that hit that the bring back was more important this week, which was definitely a side in the ledger in favor of more correlating. It is odd this week where it's like a similar dynamic of not a lot of great offensive environments. And then it's a different dynamic, though, in terms of we have a ton of games. This is the most games you're ever going to see on a main slate. So yeah, good to keep that in mind. I also want to mention the game scores table. We have it up if you're watching on the Established the Run or the Established the Edge YouTube channel, but it's a little bit in rough shape. We're recording on Thursday, which is a day earlier than usual. We also have some injury stuff up in the air, like with Tyreek Hill. Seems like he's probably going to miss. And then our current leader in the game scores is Cincinnati at San Francisco. But this game's probably going to come down a little bit if we make an adjustment. We moved Sam Darnold in, but haven't totally, redone the projections yet for that game to address his efficiency. For sure, going to project lower than Brock Purdy's. But that game is still somewhat interesting just because you do have some individual high ceiling plays. Even though the game total is gross at 43.5, you've still got Jamar Chase. You've still got, the real efficiency guys on the San Francisco side of things. And they might actually see more volume with Darnold. It's kind of like a weird give and take there.
The one thing I kind of like about this game, this is, it's an interesting slate as well, because we've got a few games where the high ceiling teams, the high ceiling offenses, Kansas City, Philadelphia, and Kansas City, Philadelphia, and who am I missing? Baltimore are all on the road against kind of weaker teams. So larger spreads there. This game is kind of unique. We don't have, again, the totals are tight. So we're kind of mitigating that here, but we have high ceiling plays on both sides. I think regardless of who's at QB for San Francisco, I think those ceilings are relatively intact when we're talking CMC or Ayuk or Kittle. And then obviously you've got strong ceiling with Jamar on the other side. So I kind of like that you've kind of got ceilings going both ways. And we've got a tighter spread, which kind of increases the chance of a back and forth contest. So yeah, I think the score will come down. I still kind of like it though. And the one good thing about these two teams is I think we've got multiple ways to kind of build stacks if you want to do game stacks here. I don't think you necessarily have to focus, hone in on just Chase or CMC. I mean, those are going to be the strongest plays, but you've got other guys, Ayuk, Kittle, T. Higgins, who's a week healthier, Joe Mixon. I mean, no one's going to want to play him, but you've got different ways to kind of build stacks in this game, and that in a game that could go back and forth. So that's why I like it. It's also on the afternoon slate, so it's another late swap opportunity.
Yeah, and also, I mentioned our projection probably comes down for Darnold, but he is extremely cheap on both sides. And if you are, a believer in that this is a system that a lot of quarterbacks can have success in, it's not going to take a ton for him to get there on this week. 6,100 on FanDuel, 4,300 on DraftKings is like,
wow,
a really cheap tag. And it is a slate, as mentioned, it's a large slate. So our two high, if you remove Tyreek Hill, our two highest ceiling projections come in that game on the entire week, despite how large of a slate it is. And it's Christian McCaffrey and Jamar Chase. So, that's definitely worth keeping in mind and a way to do it. But you do have, AJ Brown, Cooper Kupp, Travis Kelce. Like there's more studs on this slate just because it's a big slate, even if they're not necessarily in great spots, that you can take advantage of with using a pretty cheap Darnold. Next up on game scores on DraftKings is Houston, Carolina. And it's definitely a bit better on DraftKings than on FanDuel, which is often the case when you have like the lower scoring or a little bit grosser teams that are just good values, because FanDuel, the efficiency matters a little bit more and the pricing's a touch looser. That's part of the reason why you see something like this rate better on DraftKings than on FanDuel. I've got both teams coming off the bye, and yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how Carolina operates in a game where they aren't as big of underdogs. They've been kind of forced to throw at a high rate, not necessarily because they want to, but just because they've been in such negative game scripts all year.
And they have a new play caller on offense and Thomas Brown heading into this week. That'll be interesting to see how their offense adjusts. I hope that it still means good things for Adam Thielen. He's kind of the only play we can kind of bank on in Carolina. And you're pulling up the snaps and pace column from Thorman, and I was just going to mention that he's kind of liking this game as an up-tempo game, maybe a sneaky up-tempo game. The Texans have operated at a high pace all year with CJ Stroud under center, so we've also got that going for us. I was a little disappointed though to see CJ Stroud's price on DraftKings. I mean, I love CJ Stroud. Like he's my guy. I mean, look at the footballs behind me. Like I'm going to be on Team CJ, but I mean, he's more expensive than Trevor Lawrence, Dak Prescott, and Joe Burrow this week, which I found kind of surprising. I know he's had a great year, but I still found that a little bit surprising. So we're not getting a lot of value here. On the plus side, I don't think this game stack's going to be owned at all. If certainly not a high concentration of ownership, and it's going to be affordable. So if we can get both these teams in an up-tempo pace, if Bryce continues to build off his performance last week, I kind of like this as a sneaky game stack, despite kind of the lower ceiling. I think I don't think I can hear you there, Leone.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, all good.
Yeah, apologies. Mid venue podcast changes. I'm still not working from my home office here.
Whoa. Mid venue. I mean, mid episode venue change. I mean, that's
yes.
I mean, Leone just doing it all. I mean, he's that takes some skill. Good on you, Leone.
Yeah. You did mention that price on CJ Stroud should keep his ownership down though, which is a good thing. And I still think you get pretty favorable prices on Nico Collins, Tank Dell, even Noah Brown. It sounds like Robert Woods is going to be out this week to condense things for the passing tree for Houston. Let's also take a look at the KC at Denver game. And, we saw the KC stuff hit in a big way last week. I wasn't really on it until like very late on Sunday morning, and it was mostly an ownership play for me. But we do see that Mahomes, even though cheap quarterbacks have done pretty well over the course of the year, they're not that, when we get these really low totals, Mahomes can blow those guys away, which is what happened last week. And then it's so highly correlated with Travis Kelce. And I think that's what the Sims ended up picking up on late as we adjusted ownership last week. And it's a similar dynamic this week. It's less likely to be a back and forth against Denver, given how bad they've been. But, the ceiling individually on those two plays is still quite huge, Adam.
And the nice thing about the Chiefs offense is I feel like we've kind of got some semblance now of concentration of where this offense is going to funnel towards. And, in the past, we would always have this kind of conundrum of, okay, we can play Mahomes and we can play Kelce, but who are we? If we want to run Mahomes doubles, who are we going to add to that mix? Seems like now we've got our definitive answer, and that's Rashee Rice. As far as ownership goes, it's setting up pretty similarly to last week, where Pacheco is going to be kind of chalkier compared to playing the passing game stack. I think you just kind of have to hope that Kansas City gets out to a big lead, which they're favored to do. And by building out on that big lead, they use Mahomes and the pass catchers to get there.
And one thing too I'd note is, Pacheco's chalky and you can play it via the pass catchers. I ended up including Pacheco in my Mahomes stack last week. Was super fortunate to run pure late on like that screen pass that Pacheco scored a touchdown on, but less so for the direct correlation on like that type of thing happening again, and more so you've got a bunch of low totals. If Kansas City just scores 30 plus points, even if it's not directly from Mahomes to Pacheco, there's room for an offense to get there, even on a huge slate like this. And we kind of talked that way about Seattle last week too. It didn't work out for them, but I do think from setting ownership aside, I do think the fantasy point upside was there to run like a Geno double and Kenneth Walker and get there. And those are the things that, with the offense down kind of across the NFL, that being reflected in the totals, if you do catch a team that's going to put up a huge point total, don't try to like overthink the running back stuff. Like everyone want to get there. We did see Javonte Williams with one of his better games last week. I saw a tweet. I don't know if it was Ian Harditz or who had a tweet, like he's by far has the most running back touches without a touchdown this year. So maybe at some point we'll get some regression for Javonte, but he's only $6K on FanDuel. Jerry Judy's dropped to 5,900. He's 1,000 cheaper than Cortland Sutton. So there's definitely, room to play the bring back game here on DraftKings. Judy, Sutton, and Javonte, honestly, like are all kind of in play. Like none of them are good, but none of them are like bad either.
Would you even consider Marvin Mims here? I mean, not even looking at projections, but Sutton and Judy have been kind of thrown in trade deadline rumors. It just makes me wonder, assumption of rational coaching, which I know is a lot to ask for these days, especially in Denver. But like, do the Broncos start featuring Mims more in the offense if they're serious about trading away Judy or Sutton?
Are you on Levitan's payroll here with we're just martingaling this? We've been talking about the Mims expanded role for like 6 weeks in a row now.
I know.
It could happen. It for sure could happen, but I don't know if I'm going to chase. I mean, that's like a large field tournament play to me, which I get. Small field, only I can bring myself to take that stab, but I know he's been exciting in the limited opportunities that he has been able to get. Let's go to the Dallas Rams game, which is kind of in the middle on DraftKings, slightly positive, but it rates a lot better over on FanDuel. I'm still waiting for, I make fun of you for martingaling Marvin Mims. I'm martingaling this Tony Pollard huge game. Like he's been fine all year long, but I still think there's a massive ceiling game coming for Tony Pollard at some point, unless he's just broken, which maybe, post injury and bigger workload, he will just never see him flash efficiency wise. But yeah, I could see just a massive outing from him and then play it back with LA doubles or something of that nature. I know Dallas really increases the pass rate over expectation of their opponents.
Yeah, this is this is kind of tricky. Last week I was on LA's passing attack at home against Pittsburgh, and that kind of failed outside of Nakua. But the problem on FanDuel, this is a better play. Dak and Stafford are just not great values. They're not just great point per dollar plays on DraftKings. We've kind of seen, like, I know Pollard that's a tough, on the surface, it's tough to get behind, but typically when we get these smash setup spots for RB1s, and as good as Pollard is projecting, that's usually been pretty sticky. Definitely more sticky than Marvin Mims. So I'm kind of more willing to jump.
Well, it's pricier and it comes with ownership. So there's a difference.
There is.
I do want to just quickly. I misspoke. Dallas deflates pass rate over expectation for opponents, not increases. I had them mixed up with a different team. So that's not the positive I thought it was. But yeah, keep going, Adam.
Well, yeah. I mean, all I was going to say is, look, we've got Kupp again, we've got Puka again, we've got CD. You're going to have to make a decision point there if you're game stack this. They're all going to carry high price tags. Yeah, I don't know how. I don't like playing chalk tight ends in the game stack, so Jake Ferguson is going to be a tough click for me personally. But he's also kind of projecting well in this game. So I don't know. I'm having a trouble getting kind of a good grip on this game. If you want to just like lean into the pass catchers and fade Pollard, I get it, but again, Pollard's just projecting so well. It's just kind of hard to ignore that.
Yeah, it might be a better game for minis. We've got this odd dynamic too, where because the wide receivers run so well on volume for the Rams, they project decently with good ceilings, but Stafford kind of projects horribly. And like, so it's like a little bit of a force there, even though, sometimes the Sims don't mind a quarterback value that's not as strong since when it's really highly correlated with high ceiling pass catchers, which was Mahomes last week. But I think this is a little different where we really have a bad value projection on Stafford. You might be better off doing, some expensive Pollard minis with a Rams pass catcher coming back. And I think Puka finally, we've been kind of beating the drum, like, don't forget about Puka, even with cutback. And we finally saw it last week. Now people are going to be hesitant, I think, to pay up for Cup for 1,000 more than Puka. That stuff changes so quickly, and you might get an ownership discount there. Let's go to the Pittsburgh-Jacksonville game, which rates like fourth on both sites. It's like up there, just below the green value games. It's game, 42 total. Another one that's not so awesome, but we don't get a ton of ownership here. We don't, at least early on, we don't have anyone in this game projecting above 20%. I think Pickens and Deontay Johnson are really going to have a huge portion of the target share for Pittsburgh. And the Jacksonville offense is just one that we've, typically been high on, even though it hasn't hit a ton this year. We will see if Zay Jones is back this week, which, would decrease the value projections on Ridley and in particular Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram a little bit. But I still think if you can get Lawrence throwing, the doubles can get there.
Yeah, you mentioned the ownership where, it's not minuscule, but no one's projecting over 20%. And that's always like to try to remind people that, our inputs on the table are relative to the slate. So no one in this game is projecting above 20%, but we've got some guys projected right now in that like 10 to 15% range. So relatively on a 13-game slate, that average ownership is going to come out higher compared to a lot of the other games. So it's actually dragging down the game score even more so. So if you kind of take that factor into account, this game should even rate better than it is, because it's got, at least right now, we've got some good value, and the ceiling isn't horrible. I mean, it's compared to the rest of the slate, again, it's like it's pretty okay. Trevor Lawrence, I think, is a good value. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, we can keep banging the drum on Calvin Ridley. I'm hesitant, but if Zay Jones is out, you got to think that this is another good spot for him. I mean, Pittsburgh's secondary has been kind of burned by perimeter receivers. I mean, Christian Kirk's been balling out. I mean, this seems like a game that could have some potential, and the spread isn't too large. So I would hope that Pittsburgh would have some fight to them on the other side. We've seen George Pickens eclipse some 100-yard games despite not getting there on volume, but I kind of like the Jacksonville side of this game when looking at the projections.
Yeah, I like Pittsburgh more as just a bring back, but I do like the pass catcher side where, we've seen these teams like Pittsburgh that they want to run the ball, but they just can't, just have higher expected pass rates than the game script might normally indicate because they're in second and longs, third and longs a lot. And Jacksonville has had a really good run defense, and we could see that. And I think, Pickens can get there on efficiency. Deontay can get there on pure volume. Both those guys are solid. The last game that we have rating well across both sites for us is Philadelphia at Washington. This hit in a big way last time, went to overtime. I had AJ Brown 40-1 to lead the league in receiving this week. So I got there on like the very last play of overtime, ran super pure there. Did not have it in DFS that week. You're not going to get the ownership discount that week, this week, because AJ Brown's been such an alpha that people are playing him and he projects well. It's still not going to be highly owned though. It's still two very high ceiling players in Hurts to AJ Brown if you can make the salaries work. And I don't know what to do with Devonta Smith. We've really at this point leaned into the current year target share split between AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, which makes Devonta like a really bad play by our projections. On feel, I still keep thinking like we're going to get one game where it swings back, but I don't know. It hasn't happened yet, Adam.
No, it's a little concerning, but it's a good thing that it's such a large slate, because I think if it was a smaller slate, AJ Brown would be extreme. Like, I think his ownership would skyrocket. But I don't think we're going to see that given the amount of plays available to us. So we'll see how that shakes out if and when Tyreek Hill gets ruled out. The other concern, I mean, I like Philadelphia's offense here. I mean, we've seen this game hit before. The one concern I do have is if you get into such a positive game script for Philly, does it just turn into a DeAndre Swift game where they're just killing clock and feeding Kenny Gainwell as well? I don't. It's unlikely that Washington could push Philly's defense, but Philadelphia's defense isn't the best either. It's just a matter of like, are the Commanders going to have enough volume against this defense to kind of support a game stack? And if so, where does that volume concentrate at? That also seems to be a mystery in Washington.
Yeah, and that's what we had last time, was that game really hit, but it was teetering on like not hitting, which is kind of what happens when you get these teams where Washington will throw a ton from behind, which is great. And then it's like, can they be successful enough? And they were last week, they pushed, or last matchup against Philly, where they pushed the game to overtime. So I think McLaurin, Samuel, Dotson can make cases for all of them. But that's really the last game we have that rates pretty well across both sites. You do have the Saints at the Colts as a pace-up game for Thorman. I have some interest in that. Some interest in Minnesota at Green Bay, just kind of playing the flop lag on the Packers that absolutely no one wants to play after they lay a dud against the Broncos last week. I know, Adam, you had a couple games that, real low totals that you wouldn't play on a large slate, but have some appeal to you this week.
Yeah, and one game we briefly mentioned earlier was that Arizona-Baltimore game. This is really the only game with any kind of real ownership concerns from a game stack perspective, where, again, Lamar, Zay Flowers, Marquise Brown are all kind of projecting for higher ownership, and you're not getting that salary break like you did last week with Lamar and Mark Andrews. This week, they're more expensive, so it's really got to pay off to make it work.
Okay. Dirt plant time, Adam. I'll throw it to you. You can do the first one.
It's such a large slate that I actually am going to nominate 2 this week because I couldn't really decide which one I liked more, and I think one is definitely more gross than the other. So let's start off with one that I think most people could get behind from like just a rational point of view, and that's Calvin Ridley. I'll go back to the well again. I was gonna go. Oh, man, I'm sorry. No, see, we need to have pre-production on this stuff. Well, no, I mean, I'm glad we're thinking on the same page there, because at his price tag, like, eventually it's gotta pay off at some point. And Trevor Lawrence has been playing well. This offense has been playing well. Pittsburgh secondary has struggled. In a week where we're not looking at a lot of big totals. We kind of saw this last week. I think all you need is you kind of need that one stack to separate. And I think this game has the potential to do that, with Jacksonville's offense kind of leading the way there, even though they're on the road. My second one is more gross, and it's a bit homerish, but we talked about the Texans-Panthers game. You dropped in the note there that Robert Woods is unlikely to play. I actually kind of think Dalton Schultz may benefit more so than Noah Brown if Robert Woods is out. When the Texans get in the red zone, which they've been very good at getting to the red zone, not so much finishing in the red zone, but they're good at getting there. They've been looking Dalton Schultz's way a ton. I mean, CJ Stroud has locked eyes on him when they're inside the 20. He caught a touchdown last week. He could have had 2 a couple weeks ago, but could have had 2 touchdowns against the Saints. So kind of a grosser tight end play, but I kind of like Dalton Schultz in a game stack there.
Okay, I like that. I'm just going to double down on the Calvin Ridley dirt plant, Yeah. You had 2, so I think that works out. I like both those calls. But yeah, with Ridley, I think it's just like people are done with him. But he still projects fine. So it's not like total wish casting, because we're taking into account the role. And as you said, like, that's one of those sneaky games that on this type of slate, I could see shootout a little bit more than people think, or at least in a way that even if it's not a ton of points scored in terms of real life score, it is a good chunk of fantasy points scored with reception volume and whatnot. So I'll double down on Ridley. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. Make sure to check out Adam's write-up sometime Friday evening on the GPP game scores. They'll be in a much better spot at that point in time with our updated ownership, updated fantasy point projections post the Friday injury report. As always, thanks for tuning in. Good luck, everybody.